Okay, and I'm going to start with a question. Does anybody know what this means and what this says? Show of hands, shout out. No, it's not my name in Chinese. And yes, it is Chinese New Year's on Friday, but it is not related to that. Pardon? 恭喜发财, yes, thank you. Happy New Year. What this is this is the Chinese symbol for the word crisis. And when I look up crisis on the true, the definition of crisis on dictionary.com, of course I have to say that and not, pulling Webster's dictionary off the shelf. But when I look up the definition of crisis, it says an unstable condition brought on by an impending change or a sudden, abrupt change. And what I found what was most really interesting is this character for crisis is actually made up of two independent characters brought together to symbolize crisis. So if you just look at the character on the left and look at that by itself, it actually means danger. And if you look at just the character on the right by itself, it means opportunity. So we have to remember that and remind ourselves and remind our fellow associates when faced with an impending change, it's not just the fear and the danger, but also of equal parts of opportunity. So a little bit about The Guardian. We are an old, well-established company, 150 years, one of the largest mutual companies in the United States. And my story will focus around the group insurance benefits division. This is the division that offers employee benefits to companies and their employees across the US. We offer what's considered non-medical benefits, such as dental, life, and disability. And again, very established, over 58 years in offering benefits. And we protect the lives of more than 6 million employees and consumers across the US. And we have partnerships with over 15,000 companies. And everything that we do at Guardian really flows from our status of mutuality. So we are wholly owned by our policy owners. And what this means is, we don't necessarily report out every quarter to Wall Street. And so that really guides our mindset around a very conservative risk standpoint, really making very long-term decisions. And a great example of that in terms of our financial stability and our strength is in 2008, when we hit the financial crisis, many companies in our industry were downgraded, and The Guardian was actually affirmed by the rating agencies in terms of our financial stability and even upgraded by some. It's important to mention our core values because this is like one of the companies that I've either had interaction with or joined where the values themselves weren't actually just a mere poster on the wall. So it was a very, very interesting culture where it's very common to be in various business situations where people will be talking about decisions and then referring to what's guided their decisions, which were based into these three core values. We do the right thing, people count, and we hold ourselves to very high standards. This comes into play later as we go through our cultural change. And I have to laugh, and chuckle to myself when I hear some of the common themes this morning from some of the other two presenters in terms of we do everything the customer says, we never really say no, and sometimes that was misguided also at The Guardian in terms of an example of we do the right thing. Lastly, I just want to mention our market presence. So we're in the Fortune 500, and we do have a new CEO. She's Deanna Mulligan. In the past 3 years, she's been our CEO, and she's been recognized by Fortune 2 of those 3 years as one of the top 50 most powerful women in business. Okay. So a little bit about the forces at work that has been driving our transformational change in our business model. So has anybody heard a little thing called healthcare reform? Is that familiar? So when we think of healthcare reform, I think most of us, what comes to mind is changes to medical, right? And I mentioned before, we're in a non-medical business, dental, life, and disability. And through the legislative writing, there's an unintended consequence that impacts companies that are in this non-medical business. So there is a provision called in the essential health benefits that covers pediatric dental. So it's required that within every medical plan, children need to be covered for dental. And what that does for companies like us that don't have a medical plan, it puts us on uneven ground. So you have companies like a Cigna or Aetna that has a medical program as well as a dental program. So it's very easy for them to then kind of sweep up the market and gain a share if the provision is required on the pediatric side. The other thing that really impacts us more than maybe some other companies is our mix of business. So we have life, dental, and disability, but 70–80% of our business is coming from the dental side. And then we also concentrate in the small market. So again, healthcare reform is really targeting the small market. Our mix of business is under 100 lives. And again, a little disadvantage against companies like MetLife, who also have a standalone dental company, but that can spread the risk across their wide variety of large market and jumbo accounts, and so their risk is much smaller than ours. Now let's talk about the people side. So the left and right represent the people side. So we had, within the group division, very high turnover of our division executive. So we've had 4 division executives in 6 years. And prior to that, there's been a lot of stability. So we had rapid, after long stability of a division executive, we had rapid turnover. So you can imagine what this has done for folks and that next level down. You know, the mindset could be, well, how long is this one going to last? And is my strategy going to be, can I last longer than this new division executive? And then even the people, you know, underneath, you know, a mindset of, well, is this the flavor of the month? Particularly when, even through this rapid turnover at the leadership level, our sales, revenues, and profits always remained strong. So there was a lot of talk about change and you know, having to adjust our practices. Never quite a lot of success or stability at that high level, and still outperforming on the number side. And in terms of the rest of the organization, very long tenured employees, continually celebrating 20, 30-year anniversaries, and not a lot of movement within the employee base. Everyone was pretty much rewarded for subject matter expertise. So not a lot of movement up and only the ability to move up. So there was a mindset, or sort of this unwritten employee contract that you know, I come in, I do my job, I will have employment for life, and not necessarily a culture of performance. So we had we spent quite a bit of time around our growth strategy, and we felt we had a good business practice and growth strategy to meet all these impending risks. Diversifying our business, getting into different newer distribution channels, private and public exchanges, readying our products, expanding our product mix, expanding different distribution channels. But we really did not have a good unified sense of how we could get the organization behind us. And first and foremost, really, it was this leadership team, the division executive and his 11 direct reports, all on the same page. So 11 leaders, including myself, head of, I had marketing and learning and development, you had a head of sales, a head of operations, a head of product, legal, compliance, etc. So you had 11 leaders with varying tenure and experiences. So it was almost like a bell curve. You had one end of the spectrum where people were there for 20 years, the other end of the spectrum, 3 or 4 leaders that were hired, and not necessarily hired by this division executive, but hired in the past 1 or 2 years. And then a core group in the middle that was hired about 5 or 6 years ago, and again, to be brought in as the first wave of change agents. And so as you can imagine, there was a really different, varying viewpoint of the rate of change needed and the pace of change. And not only that, even very different definitions and vocabulary. So we might be using the same words, but not necessarily having the same meaning. And the largest, I think, struggle for most was that the idea of change, we knew we had to manage change, but it felt very intangible for us to get our arms around. We're a very process-driven organization that deals in risk and outcomes, and the people side of change felt very uncomfortable. So thank goodness for the Denison culture model, because that was an excellent way for us to start and to really get us all on the same page, to establish this baseline and to really come to this common vocabulary. And I want to say, really, as we got the first set of circumplexes, and we did this by tenure, by location, by level, manager of people, individual, and then by business unit. You know, the same type of questions. Where do we put the crowbar? What is behind the circumplex? And where we were able to really align against is to get the entire leadership group to drive honest conversations. So once we got the results, we made sure we went out to all of our groups and had discovery dialogue sessions. And again, something very unnatural to some, but we made sure we put together a comfortable enough structure and process, because that's what people felt most comfortable with, in order to have these discussions. You know, this was a very, very difficult prospect. You know, we were a very tell mode, and, you know, we had to educate around, you know, communications is very important, and listening is half of communications. You know, overcoming the fear of, what if I ask a question, or I get asked a question and I don't have the answer? Well, that's okay. So there was a tremendous amount of time and investment around driving these honest conversations by going out and trying to peel back the layers and what's underneath some of these numbers, and what did they really mean. And we've discovered there was a lot of misalignment between intention and the interpretation. And from all of that data, both quantitative and qualitative, we went and worked with the Brighton Leadership Group to come up with some thoughtful action plans. So 3 categories of action plans: shifting a belief, people development, and connecting the dots. And each one of these were sponsored by one of the executives on the E-team. I'm going to talk mostly about connecting the dots, because that was the work stream that I sponsored. And that was really about making sure that people had a clear connection between the strategy, who is the customer, how we make money, and how they fit in. So again, it was all about getting alignment and clarity around the strategy. And we did that through using visual learning maps. And the visual learning maps were predicated on learning from peers, providing that market context, and really making a personal connection. You see a photo here where large maps were placed on table rounds like you have in front of you. And, you know, people really gathered around and went through the history of a Guardian, where they were, where they joined, what happens when faced with winds of change that are not within their control. What happened to companies that didn't adjust when they need to, like Bethlehem Steel right in our backyard, as well as Blockbuster? And then what tools and different levers and support do they need as leaders to cross this bridge over to uncertainty and to begin building the future. So we were very measured in terms of building the program around making sure people understood the strategy, felt comfortable in talking about the strategy to others, and then even the highest order, which is, can they answer questions about the strategy? And what we did was we did pre-surveys before the program and a post-survey afterwards. And as you can see, these are the numbers from the leadership and officer group, over 200 leaders, that we were able to move the needle pre and post program. And so then what we decided to do is make sure we rolled out the program to all employees within the group profit center. So that was over 2,300 employees. And we made sure that it wasn't necessarily owned by the central group learning and development area, but that these leaders and their managers actually volunteered to bring out the program and energize and talk to their people and get them through this process. The other thing I want to mention is that we supported and introduced the Strategic Change Office. And this is so that we can build a dedicated resource with a consistent approach. So it is predicated on 3 different areas: creating this foundation, so a consistent methodology, providing also this global view of all the changes that are happening throughout the profit center. And if we were finding that too many changes were impacting a particular target group, the leadership team can make a decision to either go ahead and understand the risks or adjust that time frame. We provided a dedicated resource for major initiatives, and then really expanding and building the skill sets around formalizing a change agent network. And this piece, I think, was really absolutely critical and paid dividends because it became, again, a very strong listening post for us. So we did all kinds of other actions under shift beliefs, connecting the dots, and people development. So I don't want to talk about or leave the impression it was only those 2 examples. While all of this change work was going on, we had a lot of change within the business. So this was over 14 months. New leader of sales, new leader of IT, a new CFO. I'm sure he'll be remiss I left him off the slide. We restructured the sales division. We restructured several units within customer service delivery and underwriting. We had several areas of downsizing, but at the same time, we were downsizing so that we can reinvest and build up certain areas. So we had growth and investment in one area, downsizing in another. We had an acquisition. We established new partnerships, Private Exchange and Allstate, and we launched new products. So what we decided to do is then see, we had no idea, like, is any of this working? Is any of this change working? And rather than conducting a pulse survey, we decided to go out and conduct the full survey again. And we were taking bets at the leadership team. Some were saying, I think the results will go worse. Others were saying, I think there'll be no change. Others didn't want to put money where their mouth was. And we were really pleasantly surprised. But again, this is just the top view, and we all know that we have to go beyond the circumcomplex and to have those conversations. But we were surprised to find that we did have strengths. We improved in all categories, most gains in mission, and we were a much more balanced view, and again, at the highest level. But clearly there's a lot more to do. Much more work in terms of adaptability, and there's definitely a big drop-off when you get to the individual contributor. So most of our work really focused around getting leadership and then their leaders involved so that they can lead their own people. And now we need to focus more on supporting and getting clarity and alignment among the individual contributors. Just in wrapping up, just a couple of observations. Through a lot of that change, I don't think we would have been as successful if we didn't spend all that time up front in getting real alignment and active sponsorship at the highest level. And it did take quite some time to do, but once we got it started, I think it paid dividends. Cannot overemphasize enough how to make your informal networks formal. They exist today, and there's a lot of benefit in putting them to good work. And then lastly, there really are quite a bit of measures of success that can be taken and looked at along the way. We don't have to wait all the time for different clues. There are clues that exist in every day. And really, even the lessons learned, those can be even more powerful when we find them and we communicate them and we apply them, as powerful or even more than the success stories and models to exemplify. Other measures of success, just hearing that new common language being spread throughout the organization and even recognizing that, gee, that definitely is a positive sign we're going in the right direction. And then that continued measuring of understanding on any type of communication, large or small, just getting that informal feedback so that you can test things and adjust along the way. Thank you.